Welcome back, everybody, to another video here. As promised in my previous video, if it got 1,000 likes, I would bring Mekkah back for a debate. But I think
I've been here before.
You have, actually. Remember the video you did when we read the ratings for Fire Emblem Heroes?
Oh yeah, that was a long time ago.
It was a while ago. And actually, your first interaction with me, I guess this is getting back a little bit off topic, but Fire Emblem YouTuber lore is interesting, so I'll keep this in.
Of course.
Is when I first made the parody of the Super Smash community. Way back. Yeah, and you replied to it. I was like, I had like 400 subscribers.
I remember that. I just didn't remember it was you. Wow. Okay. Hi.
Yeah. So that was me. That was like I had no one following me back then. It was really small. But you've interacted with me twice so far, so this time we actually have an official conversation between us.
Yeah, it's actually both of us recording ourselves while talking to each other. It's quite different. I've never done this kind of thing before. I'm kind of new to it.
Well, I think it's actually the first time you and I have ever spoken on Discord. So, there you go. It's the first time for everything.
Rolling up to fact check this shit. Can't just let you say shit like that.
Go for it. Wow. I'm fairly certain we've never been in VC together before.
No, probably not.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess getting back to my no longer existent introduction, we're going to talk about growths.
Oh yes, my favorite topic.
Exactly. So we've got the father of pitfalls here, Mekkah, who originally inspired the very popular, now said quote that growths don't matter. And
I don't know who you're quoting there, because I've never said that. I've never said that.
Well, I guess it's a bunch of people who have copied on your followings or something like that. But regardless...
they like copy me and then they do some weird paste function where it comes out differently and it's no longer my origin. But hey, whatever makes them float, I guess.
I suppose so. So, I mean, a big thing of pitfalls is that you don't want people to overemphasize growths, which...
Yes.
I understand.
That is the pitfall. Overemphasizing growth.
Exactly. Yeah. So I understand that in the context of past Fire Emblem games, but I think this one is quite a bit different. So yes. I guess I'll start off by throwing you the ball here to let you start off. And what are your general thoughts on growths in Fire Emblem Three Houses?
Okay, so I think they matter more than in previous games because you have more levels to gain and characters need a place to go. There's less characters with high bases. So growths have a bigger place, but I still think there's some misconceptions out there and some idea that growths are somehow now all that matters, or like they matter a whole lot, especially like class growth and stuff. I think there's like a couple of things in the general public perceptions that are wrong about those. I do agree that in this game you cannot just say growths over bases, growths matter now and bases don't, or vice versa. It's a lot weirder. Stats are a lot weirder in this game. Very different.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's like they went out of their way to make a big emphasis on growths in general, especially with the fact that you get a lump amount of units. I mean, you kind of get that in other Fire Emblem games, but this one feels a lot more intimate, where you get just your entire house at the beginning and they're all level 1.
Yes. And
so you really get to watch these characters, for lack of a better word, grow throughout your journey through the game. And I just took a quick look at bases, and while there are some characters that have pretty unique bases, like I know Hubert's got 12 magic to start with, but a lot of the magic characters tend to drift between the 10 and 12. Same thing with the high speed characters. They tend to drift between the 8s and the 10s. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on just the generic nature of bases in general. It doesn't seem like they're too specialized.
Yeah, they're a lot more samey. I think that is one criticism I have of Three Houses, is that when you look at the class system overall, which I guess we're going to talk about a little bit later, almost every unit plays almost the same if you put them in the same class, and the similar bases definitely contribute to that. There are exceptions. Baleth, for example, you named Hubert. Baleth has a huge strength base. I think they have like 13 or something. Edelgard has like about the same, and like you can't really consider them bases, but for example, skills like Hilda's and Leonie's, where they and Sylvain's, where they power up other characters, I kind of consider those part of their basis stats too. And those really, really matter in the early game, those little differences. So even though the differences are relatively small, they can still have a huge impact. But as the game goes on and you grow them more and more, what matters more at that point, growths become more important, class growths become more important. Not as important as some people think, but the base differences sort of fade out a little bit as the game goes on. But I think in the early game, especially in maddening, bases are still have a huge impact on things. Like look at how people perceive a unit like Caspar, he's pretty much always ditched or ridiculed in like maddening difficulty because of his low base speed, for example. So they still matter, just not for the whole game, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah, and I definitely can see the difference between maddening and hard mode. Like, I know my Caspar, even in hard mode, was struggling up until he kind of reclassed into Grappler and War Master, and that the class itself kind of picked him up there. So, you can see the base impact from the very start, and then even the class growths can alter slowly over time. Things like that.
Yeah.
So I suppose in the grand context, I know I hate to make sweeping generalization here, but if you were to go growths versus bases for the start of characters, when you look at a character to assess them, what would you say their deciding factor is? And we can limit this to maddening, I guess, as the highest difficulty that we've got.
I'm sorry, can we repeat exactly what the question is? I was getting distracted by something.
No worries.
Just the question.
Just going off a character, when you're going to pick sort of your team and who you're going to focus on in the beginning, let's say in maddening mode, if you're going to look at their growths and you're going to look at their bases, what's the deciding factor for you to carry them forward in your playthrough?
Oh, geez, that is indeed a very generalizing thing to talk about. See, when I picked my squads for my first playthrough, I was just like, I want to use my Golden Deer students. And then for my second playthrough, I was like, I want to use the Blue Lions. And then it was kind of almost determined more by story than anything. So I haven't really thought about my team very much. But when I pick my team for maddening, I generally like to ditch 1 or 2 students early on just to make space for later recruits. And I think I decided to ditch Bernadetta and Caspar in my Black Eagles playthrough, my Crimson Flower maddening run for my streams right now. But there wasn't really any concrete reason for that besides the fact that in Caspar's case, like I said, his bases kind of suck, so he's hard to make work, so I decided on that. Bernadetta I actually quite like for maddening mode. She has a lot of traits that I would generally use, but funnily enough, none of them really involve her growths or her bases or her modifiers, really. What they really involve is like the skills that people learn and the kind of combat arts they pick up early, their abilities. That's the kind of stuff that makes me initially consider who to pick. And for the early game, I think those are the most important traits, because later on, you can customize your students kind of whatever you want. So for the mid and late game, you can kind of do whatever you want, I feel like, almost like in maddening mode. Like I remember Jazz, for example, he trained Manuela's Reason rank, even though she's got a like negative, what's it called? It's like a Bane in Reason magic, but he still got up to A level in Mortal Savant. So that shows me that if an amazing quote-unquote player like Chaz can train an amazing quote-unquote unit like Manuela in something she's not amazing at all the way to A rank just to be an immortal memes class savant, you know what I mean? Then,
of course I do.
And I think you should focus on the early game performances, and then you look at things like I said, like those damage modifiers that Hilda and Sylvain and I forgot the last one have, or like people like Felix who can unequip a battalion and get +5 damage. That's actually the kind of stuff that I look at for my early game squad. Other than that, I don't know. I guess one thing I could note is you can do some cheesy stuff with reclassing sometimes that can help patch up a unit's weakness. For example, Gilbert is usually memed for having really low speed base, but if you reclass him properly, given the right certifications, you can get like +12 speed or something from a promotion or a reclassing. So that's the kind of stuff you can patch up. But generally, I don't really look at class growths, bases, or modifiers, or even their own units' growths and bases. I know I always use Boleth because he's super good, and I always use my Lord because they're also super good. But that just happens to be because they're all around really good. There's no real defining trait that makes them stand out. Plus, you just want to use them because they're in your house and they're super powerful. It's really hard to pick a defining factor. Like, I'm curious where you stand on this because you made this question.
Right. So I think you kind of went along the train of thought that I was actually going to lead into. And that's because the most recent video I made, I was sort of discussing whether advanced classes were better than master classes in some aspects. And I was judging the sniper class, and it has actually a lot more utility with Hunter's Volley in maddening mode specifically, because that skill's probably kind of broken.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I would say, it's neither growths nor bases. I think it's like you said, it's skills and utility overall, in terms of like, there's a lot more intricacy here where you want to put them into the right classes to help you succeed, abusing the extra range. I mean, bases and growths don't matter if the enemy can't counterattack you, for example, if you're just chipping away from way too far away.
I don't know if it doesn't matter, but it matters less because you don't have to take a counterattack. You're right, your defenses don't really matter that much.
Sure. Yeah, I guess we can frame it that way because I generalized, and that's not a good thing to do. But
Well, that's the thing, right? This game has a very huge cast, a very huge range of enemies too. Like the enemies, they hover somewhere between 10 and 50 AS or something like that. So it's really hard to make a generalized statement on anything.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I was actually going to get to that in a little bit. Is, how much do your growths really matter if you're going to go up against a bunch of end game enemies with 50 attack speed plus?
Yeah.
Where you're getting doubled no matter what you're going to do. Does that mean, certain growths don't matter? Would you, specify, trying to enhance specific stats like maybe strength, or trying to pile up defense or resistance? Would you go for trying to go into a bunch of wonky reclasses, like trying to put everyone into, the warlock class quickly just to get that 15 resistance? You can do a lot of funky stuff, I guess.
Yeah. I think once you get to a certain point, and disclaimer, I haven't finished Maddening mode yet. I've watched someone play Maddening mode again, Chaz. So I sort of know what's going on, but only on one route and only one person playing it. So it isn't really representative. But if you concede the fact that you get doubled, the whole metagame of Fire Emblem pretty much changes. Because for example, the GBA Fire Emblem games, it's generally you want to tweak your stats as far as you can, or tweak your team to the point where, okay, my units, I need to try to get into double attack and then survive a reasonable amount of enemies so they can kill them. And I can have huge enemy phases where my guys equip javelins and hand axes and kill everything. And then in the tougher games, usually it turns more into a player phase fest, where this doesn't happen often. I think only FE12 and FE6 kind of pull it off, where instead of focusing on one-round kills, you just want units that can reasonably survive and do enough chip damage to where you can 2-hit KO. But the differences between units kind of diminish once you concede that you're no longer one-rounding. But we've very rarely had a game where you get doubled so frequently as in Maddening 3 Houses. And if you concede you get doubled, the whole metagame changes, because at that point what you want to do is, well, first of all, defense and resistance become a lot more important, and protection rather, and resilience I think it's called, where if you're taking double damage anyway, you want to make sure that you can take those hits, because every single point of defense you get, for example, counts double when you're getting doubled. And you also get a bigger focus on guard adjutants that I think protect you if you get doubled.
Right.
It's been a while since I watched
they decrease damage on the second hit.
Yeah. Oh, they reduce the damage. That's right. So that's more important. And speed becomes a lot less important. I think that's the main thing that changes, because, again, in FE7 you're kind of trying to get to around 13, 14 speed to double most enemies in the game. In this game, whether you have 14, 24, 34, or 44 speed doesn't matter. If the enemy has 50 speed, it doesn't matter. So the speed carrots, they are almost worthless in some points, which is why I agree with the school of thought that you might as well focus on stats like strength instead to try to kill the enemies that attack you anyway. But again, this is all very generalizing, talking about a huge game with a ton of, well, not really different maps, but a lot of different enemy types. And it's really hard to figure out one way to do it, but if enemies have that much speed, which they often do, then it does change the whole metagame, and I think in favor of stats like defense and away from stats like speed, even though speed has historically been the best stat in the game.
Right, yeah, that's why, the kind of I think you put it very well, and I agree with basically everything you said there. I think there's something to be said about having a few units that can try and not get doubled, just to have that frontliner bait unit for certain situations. But I agree with you. It's a strategy game, and there's a bunch of different ways to try and approach it. And there's a bunch of different ways to player phase as well. And one of them is nuke from distance, all that kind of stuff. And so I think a lot of the stats become also a little bit less relevant as you climb up. And I guess this is me transitioning into the next point I want to go into, is because classes are so differently structured now, where every class has its own base stats. And so once you get into that class, and I think it really starts to show with the advanced classes, where you kind of start to get into that transition level where everyone kind of starts looking the same. And these classes really start to get, much more, for lack of a better word, specialized growths and specialized modifiers in a certain way. And so I don't know what you think, but I think the way the classes were done were a little bit lazy this time around.
A little bit. Yeah, I think you put on your little note thing, you put class growths versus class bases versus class modifiers. I thought the class bases would be bigger than they are, and more important than they are, but I'm glad they aren't, because they kind of turn units into the same. But I find that whenever I promote my units, they don't really gain all that many stats. They generally have grown to the point where they have already reached the class basis, unless they've been really RNG screwed. Sometimes I'll get like a promotion that gives me like +3 res or +4 defense or something minor like that, but generally they don't really matter all that much. Class growths, I'm in the school of thought that they honestly don't matter very much. I know people meme about the Mortal Savant class having like very low speed growth, but when it comes to something like the master classes, like that's the class you spend not the least time in, but a very little time in, and it does very little to shape the unit up to that point, because if a unit got all the way to level 30 into their master class, their stats are probably not going to change a whole lot between level 30 and level 40, not to the point where a different master class is really going to change a whole lot. So I don't think that changes much either. I think one small component of a unit, be it class growth or class bases or even class modifiers, it's not going to do a whole lot in this game. What you really got to look at is the giant whole picture, and that's what's going to change in between level 1 and level 30 or level 40. And every minor detail, the details, they matter as part of a grand whole, but generally don't really change a whole lot, if that makes sense. It's like basically like the point in a microcosm is like if a character loses 10% speed growth or 20% speed growth from one class to another, I don't think that changes a whole lot. What really matters is like how much speed growth did they get all along the way. I guess that was kind of like a train of thought kind of thing. I kind of rambled off there, but I hope you see my point, is that a minor difference between like two classes doesn't really matter all that much. It's all about the big picture.
Right, and I agree with that. And I think that's where someone correctly pointed out way back when I did my master classes video, is that the modifiers here in this case are the ones most important. Like, for example, let's continue off the Mortal Savant train, because that's a hot topic. You do lose it has the negative 10% speed growth, but it also does lose 3 speed if, for example, you're transitioning from Swordmaster to Mortal Savant.
I will say in response to that, because I noticed that in your video, you're comparing it to like the hottest speed class in town. So basically you're kind of demoting a unit speed-wise. But I think it depends on where they come from, because yeah, it's a downgrade from Swordmaster speed-wise. But if you compare, for example, Mortal Savant to something like Gremory, for example, if you're talking about like Lysithea, for example, the speed difference isn't all that big. It's there, but it's not very huge or anything.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I was talking about it more so from like a sword perspective.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. If it is, mages going into that, you can look at it a little bit differently. That's correct. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So. So yeah, I wanted. Yeah, we were classes. I think we're still on classes. I wanted to touch a little
class
bit.
Modifiers. Yeah.
Right. So I think those are a little bit more important than growths. And you correctly said that, yeah, you found that your, certain class bases weren't getting leveled up so much. For me, I had in my latest run of Black Eagles, which is the last run I saved, my Bernadetta had like 12 strength, and I was leveling up her to go into Warrior, which had 19. So I got a huge boost in that. Mm-hmm. But I think you're right. Unless you're doing something way out of the ordinary like that with a character who has probably got low strength growth and is likely to get screwed, I didn't notice that I got a lot of difference out of reclassing my units at all.
Yeah, I think on a regular promotion train, you don't see it very much, and I tend to be a very basic bitch when it comes to that kind of promotion, so fair enough. I will say you can do some very cool things with class bases where you can see a huge improvement, such as your Benedetta example. I've seen people train up armor ranks of certain units just to get a certification for an armor unit just to boost the unit's defense or something. That kind of stuff can be cool. I just haven't dabbled into it too much, so I don't really notice it when I'm playing like regularly. Class modifiers, I thought before a while that they were more important than growths. I will say now that like they're definitely more RNG proof, which is something I like about them. They're more concrete, you can rely on them a little bit. But I think again, this is a game where minor differences between classes don't really matter that much. Again, the biggest culprit here for previous games is speed. Taking the unit from like 10 to 12 speed, or for example, is like huge in previous Fire Emblem games. In this game, it's like, whatever, dude, you're still getting doubled by everything, or you're doubling Armor Knight, so who cares? So I think in that sense, even those tiny modifiers don't really matter all that much, unless they're really big differences, or you're somehow at a point where it does make a difference. But I find those to be the exception rather than the rule. But it depends on what part of the game you're talking about too, because a couple of points early game, that's a huge difference. Like adding 2 or 3 damage to someone is a huge difference early on, especially in maddening, but even in hard, it's a huge difference. But mid to late game, I don't find it to be that big of a deal. I think, again, unless it's part of a bigger whole where, I don't know, you're dumping, some random example, you're dumping like speed carrots every day of the month on someone where you can, that could make a difference. But in general, I don't think a modifier like +3 of almost any stat can make a difference. The exception being probably strength and magic. A little bit of damage can make a big difference, but it's all so situational. You know what I mean? I can't really come up with even any concrete examples because there's so much variety in this game.
Right, exactly. And I think that's a good thing that there's so many different things going on in this game. I think if they grab this class system here that they've got and they try and enhance upon it a little bit, specialize it a little bit out, I think we can really have something special going forward if we keep, this kind of thing.
It could.
Unless you think we should go back to GBA days.
I really liked it when units were designed for the situations around them. When you take a unit like, I know this is not a biased pick or anything, but when you take a unit like Isadora, you can kind of tell that her stats were sort of designed around the enemies that she was meeting in her joining chapter. But in this game, where every unit joins very early on and you're just expected to grow them out of proportion, basically, to the point where the game cannot be designed at around how strong they can be, I don't know, I think some potential good design is lost through that, and I kind of miss the days where units would join along throughout the game, in a way.
Oh, totally. That's one of my biggest criticisms of this game is there's no on-map recruitment later on in the game. Like, I miss that so much. Like, why can I not, just recruit Harkin at the very end of the game, there with a special conversation that's story relevant? Like, none of that's there anymore.
Yeah, the sandbox design, I think it was fun for once, but I wouldn't mind going back to the old days. Even like Awakening had that kind of stuff going on.
Mm-hmm. Right. It also kind of takes away from the character development in that, there's nothing of their class related to their personality much anymore. So just that kind of side to it as well.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, units have certain preferences. They still express that a little bit through their talents and banes and stuff. So it's still a little bit there. I think that part of it is fine. It could be better still, but I think that part of it is not in any danger right now.
Yeah, I suppose so. I'm just a huge stickler for like character development and story and stuff. So for me, every little bit matters.
Yeah, but like when you look at like Felix, for example, he has a bane in authority because he like working alone, and he has a skill too that like indicates that I don't like to work with battalions. I just prefer to be a lone wolf, basically. So that makes a pretty big statement about his character without any kind of relevant story dump or anything. It's literally just in the gameplay, which is something the GBA games haven't really done.
That's true. Yeah, that's a fair point. Speaking of which, I'm going to just transition off a point you made earlier about early game versus mid game versus late game. And I know this is a discussion that's been had, especially based off things like Thracia, where the early game is the hardest part of the game and then it kind of eases off. What do you think, I guess this is kind of a tangent, what do you think about Three Houses? Do you think that maintains? Or
where the early game is hard? Yeah, for maddening, definitely the early game is by far the hardest part. Also the most interesting part, for sure, because there's a lot of little things you can do to optimize yourself. Things I made it like a whole maddening video about this, but I like the fact that gambits, battalions, what else, personal skills, all those things matter so much more on maddening than they do on hard, especially in the early game. Mid game, there's still like a lot of full customization you can do, but it definitely does get a lot easier. You start to be able to one out enemies again, and it becomes a lot easier in the mid game. That part has almost never changed in Fire Emblem, and Three Houses is no exception. I will say maddening early on is pretty bullshit though.
Yeah, oh yeah. I've only dabbled in the early parts of maddening. I haven't finished it yet either, so I can imagine that it only gets easier from there because the early game is like, even the mock battle at the very beginning is like, what the hell?
Yeah. My personal biggest hate boner is for Chapter 5, the Gautier map with the long winding corridor to the boss. Have you gotten to that part yet?
I have. Yeah,
that one is a huge ass slog. That map size should have been cut by 3.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I like the map design, but that works for like mid-game to late game, maybe. Early game is kind of brutal.
Yeah, I just hate that everyone has 4 movement, really. That's my biggest pet peeve, probably.
Stride can only help so much at that point.
Yeah, twice, and then it's done. Yeah. I like to save 1 for emergencies, so I get like to throw 1 stride, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, I mean, I guess speaking of which, this kind of transitions us a little bit into it. A long map, Chapter 5. One of my friends actually just finished mapping out an LTC of Chapter 5, a 1-turn clear.
Oh, cool.
Of that in maddening, so that's pretty exciting. But I guess I wanted to get your take while we're talking about, growths and bases and all that kind of stuff, is how has this affected LTCs and speedrunning? Because I know you've dabbled a little bit in both of those.
A little bit, but not too much. I'm actually a complete noob on LTCs in Three Houses. There was a guy that finished Golden Deer in 99 turns, and that's almost all I know. Like, I know a lot of the game is warp skippable, and maddening does not change that at all. I've definitely seen that going on. A friend of mine, Rengar, he has been forced to LTC at a certain chapter because his game kept crashing at the end of it. So that is also a side of LTCing that I've seen. Other than that, I haven't done any LTCing myself. I have done some speedrunning and some racing, but I don't think that's really very relevant to the topic of bases and growths, because speedrunning is basically just you use bullet to get through chapters quickly and you kill everything, and you can't even like do detailed stat analysis when you're playing, because you're just constantly meshing the start and A buttons to get through everything as fast as possible. So you don't even see anything. You see you see enemies, you move your bullet in, and then you press enter, and then hopefully things die. And those are also done on normal mode, because those are just faster and more reliable. So most of the time it's just, okay, Bullet has really good bases and he's available for every map. You can't undeploy him anyway, so you just have to use him pretty much. So there's no real choices involved in that matter. You do use your Lords, but those are also units that, like Baleth and the Lords, not only do they have good bases, but they also have good growths. So there's no real basis versus growth discussion in there. But for LTC, what I like about this game for LTCs is that even though LTCs generally don't really allow for a lot of self-improvements, this game has a lot of things happening off the battlefield where you can still train your units. So there's still a lot of optimization and customization involved. And that makes LTCs very interesting. You can get like a unit up to warp, like Lysithia or Linhardt, even though they rarely get time to use stabs on the battlefield, for example. And you still tutor people in all sorts of things to help things go faster. You get like rally bots going and stuff without ever having to train them on the battlefield, which is like interesting. But generally, in a speedrun, you don't really care about bases or growths, and in an LTC, you care, but it's pretty hard to get units trained on an LTC, because I know that the guy that did Golden Deer LTC, I think he pretty much only used Boleth for fighting, because he was very afraid that he would not be able to focus enough XP on other units. I guess there's one thing for both of these runs actually that matters, and that's that the Lords get auto-leveled in Part 2, and then you can use them, because that basically turns them into units with high bases for Part 2. I guess that part of it is pretty cool.
Do they for sure get auto-leveled? Because I've actually seen cases where Claude shows up at level 1. I think there's a weird system that goes on there. I'm not entirely sure how it works.
Maybe I'm spouting BS here, but I do remember characters, in normal mode at least, they everyone auto-levels to level 20, I think. But maybe I'm not completely right on the Lord's auto-leveling. I just know that it happens in speedrunning, and which are done on normal mode. So I guess just take that comment for normal mode.
Okay, makes sense. Fair enough. Because I know, like, I've had a certain run where I used Raphael a lot just for, like, recording purposes. I guess spoiler alert for future content coming. But but my Raphael was level 32 pre-time skip, and then post-time skip he jumped to 35. And I was like, why is he getting leveled up?
I mean, you do get that warning between the time skip or during the time skip that your units have changed, that you should check your stat screens. So maybe I should do that more often.
Yeah, some of them do, some of them don't. It's really weird. I haven't quite, grasped how it works yet.
I always thought it just referred to like the post-time skip portraits and then the changed abilities on your Lords and Boleth, where they get like better personal skills. That's
a good point. Speaking of time, I guess I'm trying to find an interesting transition between each point here, and we're kind of getting one. But in terms of time, I guess to go back to like the bases and growths argument is there are certain characters, mainly the church characters, the Knights of Saros and the Church of Saros characters, that are not easily recruitable right away. They're recruit over time, and so their bases and their classes are different. For example, Catherine, you can get her as low as level 7, and she shows up as a Swordmaster, which is like not supposed to be accessible until chapter 20. How big of an effect do you think these ones make on maddening mode, for example?
I'm afraid I haven't really used them on maddening mode very much. I do know that Catherine is a ridiculous unit, because I used her on hard mode for a little bit, and the Thunderbrand alone, it's not really bases or any kind, but it's definitely something. She has a base that doesn't grow. Thunderbrand is a ridiculous weapon, and if you can use it, that's great. I wish I wasn't playing Black Eagles right now, because I really want to have her. I know Shamir is really good, and again, this kind of harkens back to our earlier point that it's not really much about stats as much as about like her other properties. The fact that the things that make Shamir so good are like her personal skill that protects her on enemy phase, because it makes her so much stronger. The 2 to 3 range, basically 1 to 3 range because of close combat. And then, of course, Hunter's Folly, which you already mentioned, which compensates for her mediocre speed and then just makes her double stuff with the combat art, while she can still use, like, a silver bow or something. Like, people praise frickin' Cyril for that skill, but they kind of forget that Shamir has it as long as she masters the sniper class, and it's so good.
And she's the best waifu, so that's all that matters.
No, that's not all that matters. Aloy, to quickly go over that point, Aloy I haven't really used. I only saw him as, like, his that side quest chapter, that paralogue, where he's pretty good. He like one-shots people in hard mode. So, but I know we can turn into Wyvern fairly easily because he's just so proficient in axes. But from what I know, he's fairly good. Gilbert, I touched upon earlier. He looks pretty bad at first, but I think you can actually make him fairly good if you just reclass him to, well, basically anything that isn't a freaking Armor Knight. Although, I guess maybe in maddening, Armor Knight has its uses now that speed doesn't matter anymore. So all those units, I think they have variable base stats because I think they auto level. They have like stats that base stats, and then they grow up. From what I know, you still kind of want to have real quote-unquote growth units along with them because they can't really carry the things on their own. But they can definitely help support you, and like I don't know how viable these are on like the very long term, but I mean, I talked earlier about Chaz's Manuela. They all have what it takes to be viable for all game long, I think.
Right, yeah, I think there's like a few notable stars. Catherine has like ridiculous growths as well alongside her ridiculous bases, and so she's, as well as being in the Swordmaster class, which itself has insanely good growth boosts, so she's going to be fine in the long term no matter what you do with her. I think Seth is another one that I forgot to put on my list here, so and he shows up as a Wyvern, which is also movement utility. So I think, yeah, you know, but Seth is kind of a late one. I don't know if you can recruit him pre-skip, but I know post-skip he shows up in everything except Black Eagles.
I think he joins you for that one chapter where you defend Garrick Mach before the time skip, if you're not doing like Black Eagles, of course.
Right.
Well, actually, no, he joins you in Church too at that point, but you only have one level to prepare him, and then if you're the crazy person who does maddening Church, then you have Seth for one chapter before he's supposed to like carry the whole thing on his own along with Baleth, because he's all on his own with him. Or her.
I had trouble with that in hard mode. I can't even imagine.
It's not fun. Church. It's not fun.
No.
Poor Seth. Not much time to tutor him, but his class is super good.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, it was fun to have a taste of Seth in his in that paralogue where you get him in Flame without even having to recruit Seth.
I mean, it's a freaking sand chapter. Of course, you're gonna be happy to get a flying unit for it.
Yeah, they put like those two little islands where you can fly him to, just to make sure that you use him at least once.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's nice to have him there, especially if you're going in without any preconceived notions of being able to make everyone a flyer or mage to get the movement through the sand. Yeah, that was nice.
It's just weird because they're still like growth units. They just auto level, so it's kind of hard to judge them as like base units with high bases or anything. But I guess they have high bases when they do join.
I mean, they're kind of RNG proof in a way, I suppose.
Yeah, but don't the auto levels still use RNG though?
Do they?
I mean, I thought they did.
Oh, I didn't know that's how it worked. I'd have to look into that. That's interesting.
Yeah, look at Serenus Forest.
Okay.
It's a good site.
Yeah, I use it a lot. Been using it for almost 10 years now, I think. That's crazy. Yeah, it's a long time. It's been a long time. All right, so I guess the last point here I've got to discuss with you, and it's something that a few people have talked about is, and I guess it's specifically relevant here for growth discussions, is what do you think about 0% growth runs in this game? Possible or impossible?
Ouch. So Fire Emblem has become more and more growth dependent as game goes on, and I think every single iteration of a new game, people at some point say 0% growth runs are impossible now because there's too much of an emphasis on growth. And then at some point there's still some mad guy that still does it anyway and then completes the game. So I'm always too afraid to call it because it might just be possible. This game makes it look very, very hard, but there are, lights in the darkness, things that make it seem it's possible. We thought it was impossible for FP12, for example, but people have done it, even on Lunatic Plus, even though they had to sacrifice like a bunch of people for it. But like I think you'd have to edit out the auto levels of the church characters somehow, or you just allow them to grow, because otherwise it's just super weird. The same goes for recruiting characters out of your house, because especially on Maddening, those get really good auto-leveled growths. They use like the enemy growth, so they get really, really strong. For example, I remember recruiting Felix for chapter 6 or so, and he'd have like 18 strength, 18 speed or something. That's insane.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
That's insane. And like Leone too, Lawrence, like those people would have much better stats than I expected them to have in the Black Eagles, but they did. So the first thing you'd have to figure out is whether you're allowing those to be recruited or not. I don't see normal units to be being very good. They'd have to be promoted to their class bases every time, and class bases, honestly, as nice as they are for like a backup, they don't seem good enough to take on demanding enemies. But then again, there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of tools that the player has at their disposal, like gambits and all those combat arts and stuff. I know Tempest Lance is really strong, so maybe the early game is possible to get through, and once you get through the early game, you have access to so many more things. But first of all, it needs to be technically possible. They need to decide on a rule set, and from there, we can discuss how possible they are. If I had to like put my money on it, whether it's going to be possible or not, I think it'll be possible just because of how many like strong buffs and like tools the player has at their disposal. I think it's possible, but I think it'll be a while before we're able to see it. I know Sarasan and a couple of other people are like working on modding this game. They put like a Death Knight Tea Party in and stuff. So if they can do that, they can probably make 0% growth happen sometime.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see this one pan out. You touched a little bit on the bases, and I'm just looking at the sheet here in front of me on Serenus Forest, of course. And the highest single stat boost for a base stat for master classes is 20. It's either in speed or in strength in magic. Magic is actually 17 for Gremory. I mean, if you add on the class modifiers, that brings up like the War Master, which is the highest, to about 25 strength, and the Gremory to 22 magic. So, I mean, they're good enough to at least let you do damage. And your defense and resistance are, I guess, decent enough to let you not get one shot. Well, I mean, maybe that's debatable because the HP bases are not that high.
Yeah, but that's a problem. The defensive problem is big because offensively you have so many options. You get like, for example, like you have Hubert's Mire to reduce people's defense. You have Lysithia's Swarm to reduce their speed. All those kinds of options will make it fairly easy to kill like 1 or 2 enemies on player phase. But the question is, can you overcome the massive enemy density of Maddening while not dying? That's, I think, is going to be the big breaking point.
Right. I mean, you can smack them with battalions, but at the same time, I think in Maddening, the enemies have pretty high charm as well in general, so they're kind of a little bit harder to hit with those, so it's less reliable.
Yes, you could Tea Party your charm up, I guess. Or just use... But I guess not growing charm is going to make that difficult. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Because Gambit hits themselves aren't very high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I saw, was it Chaz's video that said it's between 20 and 80 at most, and then it scales off whether or not it's a Gambit boost, and so... It is definitely less reliable on Maddening, that's for sure. So I don't know. I think 0% growth runs will be possible somehow, some way. I just think right now we're probably not there yet.
Nope.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see pan out.
Really looking forward to it.
Oh yeah. I'm not crazy enough to try and do it myself. I know you probably will be.
I don't know, man. I haven't done 0% growth in any game for ages. I'm a washed up man when it comes to those. But I know, for example, Skryza is someone who's done like FE12 Lunatic Plus on 0% growth, so he'd be crazy enough probably. I know Rengor has done The Last Promise on 0% growth, so he might be interested in doing it this game too. But
how about
the days where it's only me and Don doing that.
No negative growths?
Oh my god, negative growths. I mean, I don't think it would even change that much because you just get bumped up to your class growths. I guess at some point you'd have to like hoard your promotions in negative growths just so you'd have like your masterclass stats at the right time. I think that'd be the way it goes.
Fair point, actually, yeah.
Because you get boosted up to class bases every time you promote anyway.
Right. So it would kind of cancel out the previous 10 levels or whatever as you go along.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter how many negative levels you get if you're just going to get it back up. The problem is the time in between where you don't have the promotion yet.
Huh, that's interesting. I actually hadn't thought of that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's like a big part of negative growths. The question will also be like, will people want to play this on hard or on maddening? Because if you do it on hard, it's like significantly less bad. But on maddening, boy, if people do 0% maddening, I'm gonna flip my shit.
Well, I mean, that's going to be the real challenge, I think, is whether or not you can do maddening. I think hard is definitely doable because I think the jump between hard and maddening is so massive.
Yeah, it's enormous. I remember for FE12 0% growths, Don specifically decided to do hard 2 instead of hard 3, just because he thought hard 3, even if it was possible, would just be too reliant on RNG, and he likes to do things in like a pretty safe way overall. So he just didn't even get started on Lunatic. He just was like, nah, we're not doing this. Skryza, of course, is crazy enough to just do it anyway, and he did it. So, yeah, good job.
The crazy people are the ones that make this community shine a little bit and just make it stand out and make you go, what the hell are these people doing? Why are you doing this to yourself?
Me included.
Yep. I think all of us have a crazy... I'm working on a series of me doing some like pretty dumb stuff as well that no one else would ever think about doing. So
that's what Three Houses is for, is doing dumb stuff. And if you ever start a question about Three Houses with the words, am I the only one? The answer is always a resounding no from at least 5 people.
Right. Right. Everyone's thought of it at some point in time. They just haven't done it.
You're not an original snowflake.
No.
Unless you're me. Nah, just kidding.
We all like to think of ourselves that way, Mekkah. It's okay.
Of course. I'm the hero of the story the game told me.
You're the protagonist.
Yes.
Can I be Edelgard?
Sure.
Yes.
Can I be female?
Sure.
Cool. We are pairing
Great.
now. As support approached. Or
Uh-oh.
reached.
Uh-oh.
I hope my CG will be. I hope your CG won't be as ugly though.
No, I'll get you to have it fixed or find the person who fixed it.
Thank you. I still haven't found the artist.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. Don't worry.
Thank you. My
All
fears
right.
have been eased.
Okay, so I think that's everything I have to say about growths and whether or not they matter. I think we did a pretty good job of sort of breaking it down.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think my only conclusion is they matter, but so do like a bazillion other things. And I don't think they're like. If you look at if you made a pie chart of what matters in this game, I think it's gonna be like growths are like a little bit like the kind of bit you take on your birthday when you're being polite. But then there's like a ton of other like pie slices that you also have to take into account, which is like they matter a bit, but not super much compared to other things. I guess that would be my conclusion.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's pretty fair. One of my favorite words to use is amalgamation, and I think what matters here is an amalgamation of different factors.
Well, I'm glad you know that word because I don't.
It just means it's a mix.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty much my conclusion. I think we very much agree on most of the things. So
Damn it! I was supposed to debate you, wasn't I?
Yeah, I don't know how well this was going to work as a debate, to be honest. I mean, I could play devil's advocate for pretty much anything, but I'd probably be shooting myself in the foot here.
Damn, I hate it when people do that. That's why I do it all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe I'll have you play devil's advocate and actually make growths over matter or something at some point.
If you're a devil's advocate and you say something, does it backfire instantly? Because, devil weapons backfire.
Oh, yeah. Only if you're Mangs.
Oh,
only if you're Mangs.
They don't backfire for him.
No, not for Garrett, nor for... Who was the other one that he got killed?
No, they're dead.
Bartray. I think it was Bartray.
Bartray, Oswin.
Oswin. That was the one. Oswin. Yeah.
All
right. Anyways, we're just rambling at this point, so I think we should conclude. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
40 minutes seems good.
Yeah, 40 minutes is pretty solid. Thank you very much, Mekkah, for quickly agreeing to do this with me. I very much appreciate your insight in the conversation.
No problem. I enjoy being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And if for some reason you guys don't know who Mekkah is and haven't checked out his channel, I will leave it either on the screen or in the description below, or both. And you guys should go watch his content because he does some great stuff.
Cool. Thank you.
Pitfalls. All right.
Pitfall.
Pitfall. All right. So thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.
Bye.